United States aircraft carrier Hornet, part of a task force steaming into Japanese waters, is now revealed as the secret base from which American planes first bombed Tokyo.
After the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the United States developed a plan to strike back at the Japanese home islands. The daring raid, led by then Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, laid waste to Tokyo and other Japanese cities and shocked the enemy with a daring, unexpected attack that exposed their vulnerability. 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers took off from the U.S. aircraft carrier Hornet on a one-way trip to Japan. The large bombers could take off from a carrier but were unable to land back on the ship. Their mission called for them to land in China or ditch at sea after releasing their bombs. On board plane number 6 was a young navigator from Utah, Chase J. Nielsen. Born in 1917 in Hiram, Utah, Chase attended Utah State University and graduated in 1939 with a degree in civil engineering. In August of that year, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps and was commissioned as a second lieutenant 2 years later. President Roosevelt personally ordered the Doolittle Raiders to attack the island nation. The crews trained in secrecy at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida and sailed from San Francisco for the Pacific Theater on April 2, 1942. All 16 heavily laden bombers made it to their targets. Chase Nielsen's plane successfully hit industrial targets in Tokyo, but ran out of fuel before reaching safety.
Each bomber sets its course for carefully prearranged military objectives in Japan, a course that will put them over Tokyo at high noon in broad daylight. The Yokosuka Naval Base ablaze. Arms plants, rail yards, and oil refineries smashed by the raiders in Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, and Osaka. Then journey's end for the great adventure. Fuel gone, 15 of the planes are wrecked as their crews are forced to bail out over China and Japanese-occupied territory.
2 of Nielsen's fellow crewmen were killed as their plane ditched 4 miles offshore in the East China Sea. The survivors, including Nielsen, were captured by Japanese forces. He was tortured and forced to endure mock executions, but he never gave the enemy more than his name, rank, and serial number. Eventually, Nielsen was sentenced to die in Japan, a sentence that was later commuted to life in prison. 3 of his fellow raiders were not so lucky. After 4 years as a prisoner of war, Nielsen was rescued by an OSS pararescue team. He was kept in solitary confinement for most of his time as a POW and weighed only 109 pounds when rescued. Nielsen bravely returned to China the following year to testify against his captors in international war crimes trials. Lieutenant Colonel Chase Nielsen received numerous medals and commendations for his service as one of Doolittle's raiders, including becoming the first Utahn to ever receive the Distinguished Flying Cross. He also garnered a Purple Heart, the Air Medal, and a POW medal. The Doolittle Raiders proved that Japan was vulnerable to attack. Japanese morale was crushed because their leaders had promised that they would never be attacked. The Doolittle raid was also the first good news of the war for the Americans and provided a tremendous boost to the U.S. It marked the beginning of the turnaround toward victory for America and her allies. Following the war, Chase Nielsen rose through the ranks of the Air Force, helping to build the Strategic Air Command. Nielsen retired from the Air Force in 1961 and began a career as an industrial engineer with the Ogden Air Logistics Center at Hill Air Force Base. But he never forgot about his role in one of the most historic efforts of the war. The Doolittle Raiders held an annual reunion starting in the late 1940s until 2013. Each reunion featured a solemn ceremony in which the surviving raiders performed a roll call, then toasted their fellow raiders who had died during the previous year. Chase Nielsen survived until 2007.